My name is George Curry. I'm editor of the National Newspaper Publishers Association News Service, which is a mouthful, and I'm so glad to be here today with one of my owls. And your name is?
I'm Moses J. Newsom, and I'm a retired journalist.
You were born when?
I was born February the 5th, 1927, in Lake County, Florida. Actually, a small place called Fruitland Park, Florida, and that was about 7 miles from Leesburg, Florida, which is about 42 miles northwest of Orlando, Florida.
Okay. What do you remember most about your childhood?
Ooh, I guess I remember we were pretty poor, and I guess everything, of course, was racially segregated in the county, in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember trying to make it.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I suppose that was about it.
How many in your family?
There were 5 children. My mother was Henrietta Newsom. My father was I.C. Newsom. He was a laborer, did some farm work. My mother was mostly housework, homemaker, that sort of thing. There were 5 children, and I was the oldest.
You're the oldest.
So I had 3 sisters and a brother. He was the youngest. He's dead now, and sister next to me, she died last year.
Did you feel any special pressure being oldest?
No, not really.
Mm-hmm.
When we were growing up, I guess they didn't pay too much attention to that. And we were sort of in a country area. Not too many houses around, didn't have electricity, running water, and that sort of thing at that time. So the guys would take care of seeing that wood was there for the stove and that sort of thing, and the young women would do the cooking and that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't go too much by age. I think it was what people normally would expect men and women to do.
Mm-hmm. The reason I asked that is I'm the oldest as well of 4, and I have 3 sisters, and I felt pressure because these are my parents finished high school, and I saw how they live, and I wanted to change things for them, and I felt a lot of pressure, and that's why I asked you that question.
Yeah. No, although neither of my parents went to high school, they were very keen on us getting an education. And I started off in a school, I guess, 2 or 3 miles from where we lived. And we would go to that school in Fruitland Park, and then when you finished 8th grade, we would transfer to Leesburg, where they had the Lake County Training School for blacks, So that was the kind of educational system we had. We had walked to school for many years. We were still walking to school when I finished at 8th grade out there at Fruitland Park.
Mm-hmm.
The men would get out there when it's almost school time and go along the highway and sort of cut the grass so we would have some place to walk without being on the edge of the highway.
Really?
It was interesting, but you wouldn't want to do it all over again.
So your parents put this in your mind about you had to have an education?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Although they didn't, they knew the value of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted us all to get that.
How far did they go to school?
I would say that neither of them went beyond the 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the situation we had. And, my father, being a laborer, he was sort of catch jobs as you can. And sometimes we had, sometimes we didn't. He did a lot of work in the citrus groves down there. He was a good pruner of trees and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I guess the only job he had that was a steady sort of thing was a few years he worked for the railroad there. And otherwise, it was sort of tough for him, but he got it done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you remember when you first became aware of racism?
Uh, all my life, I was aware of racism. Uh, it was just in that area, you know, you know you didn't have the opportunities that others had. You didn't go to the same schools. You didn't use the libraries on Main Street. You didn't have jobs, that sort of thing. Um, so you were aware of it from the moment you were able to know what was going on.
Mm-hmm. How did it affect you? How did you deal with that?
Well, you just sort of got along. There was no escaping it at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And you did the part-time jobs that you could get. You tried to get yourself an education as best you could. We often had to hand down books that came over from the white schools, and it was just a two-race system,
Mm-hmm.
almost completely. And I there were people who didn't do things that others of us did, and I know one of the most troubling things that I really experienced when I turned 18 and was graduating that year. I was 18 in February. They were drafting people for World War II, and it turns out that they were allowing us to finish high school before they were actually drafting people. And at the same time, they had some German prisoners around Leesburg who were in camps there. I would see them from time to time under guard out in the citrus groves and things like that. But one day, I was in the theater in the upstairs area where colored people sat at that time. And while I'm waiting to see the movie get started, they marched in a group of these German war prisoners. They were down on the first floor where blacks couldn't sit. And that was one of the most disturbing things to me. Here were people who were just recently part of a machine that was killing Americans at war, and they were prisoners of war. And my country was giving them a better opportunity than they would provide me. So it's one of the times, you know, you get up and walk out of a theater, and you don't really know what to do. It just smacks you in the face at that point. And, you know, a couple of blocks east and a few blocks west, and you're into Pine Street, which was where, which was sort of entertainment area for blacks. And you put some money in the jukebox, and you just sit there for a while people are enjoying your music, you know, trying to get over that sort of thing. But that was a real killer for me.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 18,
And
turned 18 in February that year, and was waiting to be drafted, you know. And we had some people who knew better. They never sat up in the balcony at theaters. But if you wanted to see a first-run movie, that's where everybody went. And under the dual system that you had at that time, that was pretty much what you had. And, you know, when you're a country boy, you know, you sort of think while you're waiting to be drafted, what happens if you've got to kill somebody? You find yourself in a situation where somebody was about to kill you. You know, you sort of think about those things. And then when you get in a situation like that in the theater, it just comes down on you, you know.
I'm thinking about this. You know, years later, you still remember this.
Oh yeah, I'll never forget that. Uh, that's something that goes to the grave with me. It was really an astonishing sort of thing, you know, to face up to.
How did you process that?
Well, it was the way you processed a lot of the racist stuff there. You know, I'd sit there in the booth in the plays while they were dancing to my music, and guys would come by and yell something like, "Man, you look like you just lost your best friend, your girlfriend put you down," or something. So you sit there, and after a while, you just realize that's reality, and just hope that someday you would be in a position to try to help bring about change.
Tell me about that. Tell me about how you thought your life would be. Did you look beyond that, saying, I got to get out of here? Or how did you, what went through your mind?
Well, after about 27 months or so in the Navy, I spent a little time trying to help my father there, who was farming, and at that time he would plant about 40 acres of watermelons and that sort of thing. I think back to it sometime how we'd load those watermelons, man. Now I go out and pick up one that's 30 pounds or so. You know, it's fun. But I suppose there was an intent to go to college anyway. And when I was young, I would see copies of the Pittsburgh Courier, the Amsterdam News, or maybe the Norfolk Journal and Guide. And you see what these guys are doing and what they're writing and how different it is from what you're getting in, say, the Times Union or some other daily paper at that time. And it just occurs to you that maybe if you went into that field, you'd be able to make a contribution somehow to help bring about change, or at least record some of the things that people were trying to do to bring about change.
So that's when your first taste of journalism, an idea hit you that you might want to be a journalist?
Yeah, yeah. Just reading those papers and looking at conditions in the country and in the area where I was living, you just saw a need to try to help out.
Mm-hmm.
I had been doing pretty okay in English classes and that sort of thing, so it was a field I thought I could get into and maybe help out in some way.
How did you get these black papers at the time?
Well, they would come in, and actually, I don't remember which ones now, but I sold a couple of them for a short period.
Uh-huh.
But there were different stores around, you know, they
carried
had
them.
black-owned stores and whatnot that would carry those papers, and you could get them. Not always on a regular basis, but enough to see what was going on and how they were treating the news, and how important I thought it was to have a voice that way.
Is that when you got an idea of what the rest of the country may be like, or how life might be different through those papers?
Well, to some extent, I knew that things were somewhat different in other areas. We had quite a few relatives who lived in places like New York and Ohio and other places, and they would come to visit. And I had a couple of trips up. My grandfather would go up to New York sometimes, and it needed someone to escort him. So, and a couple of my sisters went to school in New York for a while. So I had an idea how things could be different, how things were different in some areas. But later I found out that they were quite different, but not totally.
So, what is this notion of going to college? Where did that come from? That you can go to college?
Well, that was part of everybody's aspiration there. When I was coming out of school in '45, uh, almost all the graduates had an idea that they would like to go to college. Some of them made it, some didn't. Some got scholarships. I was in a little band there for a while that trying to play the clarinet, and not good at that. But we did hit a few of the local spots around there, made a little music. Some of the guys were pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them got music scholarships at Florida A&M. And it was always an ambition to go. And actually, I probably could have got out of the Navy a few months earlier, but I wanted to make sure I had enough GI Bill time to get through college.
Mm-hmm. How long were you in the Navy?
Yeah, about 27 months.
And where's your travel? And where particularly?
Basically, stateside.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Bainbridge in Maryland for a boot camp. Went out to California for a while, not doing too much out there. And you get to see some of the differences even in a short stay out there, even while traveling, you know. We went out on a troop ship, we went out on a troop train. But coming back, when I came back on regular transportation. And we get to some little place in Indiana, and the conductor wants me to move back to where other colored people were sitting. And it just happened I was playing cards with some guys who had come back from overseas that I had met while out in California. And they said, if you don't want to move, don't move. So I didn't move. Mm-hmm. And the conductor would come by and look me over from time to time. But it was, you know, it was sort of unusual sort of thing when you're ready to go fight for your country and all that kind of stuff, and you're still being given that sort of treatment. But it was worse than that for a whole lot of soldiers, you know, the guys that I met, the guys I talked to later when I was working. So it wasn't a thing that would deter you, you know, from doing what you wanted to do.
But it was this irony of willing to give up your life for your country.
Yeah.
And still getting treated like this.
But actually, I spent most of my time, I caught a ship out of Norfolk, and we went down to Texas, Orange, Texas. And that's where I spent most of my time, putting ships out of commission. Mm-hmm. We were going down, painting ships and de-rusting ships and putting in preservative and that sort of thing. And eventually I got transferred to Green Springs, Green Cove in Florida, out from Jacksonville there. So that was pretty good. I could be home 3 weeks out of 3 weekends out of a month. You know, mm-hmm. A lot of people thought I was out of service. You know, I was down there so much, but it was good. I never really. I tried to get signed up for a couple of trips to China on ships I knew was going over, that sort of thing, but I never really got out of the States.
Mm-hmm. You look back on your time in the military, was that a good period for you?
I'm sorry?
When you look back on your time in the military, in the Navy, was that a good period for you?
I would say it was a so-so period. Nothing to really brag about. Best friend of mine, we were going through the line together when we were being inducted, and they stamped him Army, and they stamped me Navy, and I ended up in the steward's branch, and I wasn't too keen about that, so I started doing whatever I could to get into some other work, you know, and it ended up being decommissioning ships, mm-hmm. That sort of thing.
How do you decommission a ship?
Well, what you do, they've got ships lined up on this side of a pier and lined up on that side of the pier. And we had work groups. You'd go in, you would try to get rid of all the rust.
Mm-hmm.
You even had to go down into the water tanks and that sort of thing, and try to get rid of all the rust that was there, and then you would try to paint over with this preservative stuff that they had. And that was not the hardest work in the world, but if you stayed there long enough, it got to be kind of lonely, if you got that 12 to 4 shift, man. And you're out there on these ships, nothing but ships out there, and the water splashing against the ships, and you can't go to sleep, man. You got some guy drive up and down the pier every once in a while. But it wasn't bad duty. But I tell you, sometimes we'd play cards until time to go on that shift. And by 4 o'clock, man, you sort of thinking you could be someplace else,
Mm-hmm.
But guys would come by and bring you coffee and make sure you woke and that sort of stuff. But, I don't know, I guess that was sort of wasteful period for some guys, man. In the afternoon, Friday afternoon, when guys were getting away, you could have paint buckets sitting around and over the side, painting all. You guys getting away. It's an interesting thing. But I guess I did learn one thing about being in the Navy, and that guys would spend their money fast, and they were willing to pay 25 cents on the dollar until next payday. And I wasn't doing that much. I wasn't spending that much money, So I said, you guys want to pay 25 cents on the dollar, man. Take it, So I started making money, man. I think my mother thought I was sending a lot of it home. I think my mother thought I was into big time gambling already, But I was really making it from the guys out there.
Let's go back to this idea of you becoming a writer. And you said you're from reading the newspaper. Did anybody tell you you were a good writer when you were in school? How did teachers judge you in that area?
No, nobody recommended I would go into journalism. It was something that came to me by sort of observing what others were doing and looking at some of the shortcomings in some of the daily papers that you read. They'd have a couple of inches on something. They would have a black page where they would put all the black news and that sort of thing. I think at the time Union in Jacksonville was probably the most popular one down in Central Florida at that time. At one time during their career, they had an office set up in Jacksonville where they had the black staff working out of its own office. That sort of thing. They would emphasize crime stories and some stories on teachers, preachers, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But, black people were shut out from so many opportunities. Most places, you couldn't get a license to be a plumber. You couldn't get a license to be an electrician and those kind of jobs that, these were good paying jobs with great opportunities, and you just couldn't get them,
Mm-hmm.
And it's so different now, when you go back to Leesburg and all the people in all different kind of jobs, in particular in sales jobs and things, in stores, that sort of thing. And people at every level, you got the lawyers and doctors and that sort of thing. It's a completely different situation now, although they still have a need for some progress to be made in certain areas.
So how'd you end up at Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri?
Well, that was a sort of short story. I had thought I would start out at Tuskegee. But something came up while we were doing watermelons that summer, and I decided, and my father decided, it was time for me to go ahead and get started in college. Uh, at the time, the school that I could get in quickest at that time was Astoria College out in West Virginia. And they had a relationship with Lincoln University. And in fact, Lincoln would take all their credits except courses such as religious courses they might teach or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I started out there for a short time, and then I transferred to Lincoln from there. At the time, we had a school of journalism out there, and I think it later became a department.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a great school. Had a lot of good.
Pride there then.
Yeah, he was my dean there.
See, you know, I know that stuff, did
yeah, yeah. He was my dean there, and had a lot of good advice from him. We had some good instructors there, and they had a full complement of things. You know, they had the editorial part, they had the advertising, circulation departments, and all of us took basic studies, but then they had special editorial areas and that sort of thing. And we had the wire services there. We'd get a kick out of trying to put together things on a daily basis to compare with what the local papers and what the daily papers would be doing, how our selections from the watch services
Mm-hmm.
matched up with what they were doing. So it was a good, great place to be. They had a great printing shop situation down there. So I got a chance to do this thing where you put the letters in different boxes and all that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. And learn how to work on the linotype machine, that sort of thing. It was a real comprehensive type of situation.
The only reason I know about Dean Pride was
Yeah.
I was at St. Louis Post-Dispatch for 11 years.
Ah, okay, yeah.
And I used to
yeah.
go up to Lincoln, won a lot of Lincoln Unity Awards, and I was
Ah,
judged for some of
okay.
those. So I'm very familiar with That's the only reason I knew
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, we used to go over to Post-Dispatch, and what's the other paper there?
Globe Democrat.
And we would go over there and meet with some of the staff people and sit in on some of their editorial board, editorial meetings and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but my worst experience, I guess, over in St. Louis, man, was going over there. I took a job in the post office during during the holiday Christmas season. And it was cold, and it was icy, and I was working with a guy who was doing packages all over the area. And, you know, being from Florida and all this ice and stuff, you know, I had to buy the cleats that you put on your foot, man.
Football cleats.
Yeah, but I had a good guy, you know. I was about to give it up, man, and he said, look, when we get to places, I will go back and line the packages up, and all you have to do is just take them up to the house, you know. So he had a pretty good beat, you know, a lot of apartment buildings and things, so we could get rid of a lot of stuff without making a whole lot of stops. But boy, that's when I knew what winter was like. It was something over there, some of those holiday Christmas plans going over there. But you needed to make a little money, you know, so I was already married at the time, and you needed to keep a little more money coming in than what the GI Bill was offering. I did a lot of things. I worked in the library, the journalism school, printed pictures for commercial photographer at night sometimes. He would shoot stuff, and I would process stuff, you know, at night in his shop. So got a chance to do some of everything while I was there.
You alluded to earlier that there was an urgency for you to get out and go to college. What was that about?
Well, I don't want to go into that,
Okay.
but my father was sharecropping with somebody,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the buyers would come down and meet with people. They come down from the north and they would meet with people, and they'd meet at these cafeterias and things where you couldn't go,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd talk about prices and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, we had a great crop of melons that year, and we were loading in boxcars, as they do, and people were getting quite a bit more money for some stuff that I thought was inferior to what we had.
Mm-hmm.
And got a little tested there on talking to people about why this was going on. So that was pretty much what it was. So.
Well, when did you get married? You said you were already married when you got to Lincoln. When did you get
Yeah,
married?
I was married in 48
Mm-hmm.
and started school long about that time. And my wife didn't make it up to Storer College while I was there, but when I went to Lincoln, I was able to rent a place there. Actually, there were 3 families living in a house that we rented there,
Mm-hmm.
a couple of blocks away from the journalism department. And after that, we stayed in that place until we left, actually. And I think L. Alex Wilson, who was editor of the Tri-State Defender down in Memphis, he had gone out to Lincoln for a while. But he was also from Leesburg. He had taught at Leesburg for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that because I lived in the country, but my wife lived short distance from the school, so she knew him. And I think when he saw that I was from that area and had gone to a school that he was familiar with, he was the first guy who gave me a job.
And you're Tri-State Defender.
Yeah, spent 5 years there.
But before you do that, tell me how you juggle being married and going to college.
Well, you had classes, and you knew when your classes were scheduled. Usually Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays were pretty busy days, and Tuesdays and Thursdays were pretty light days. You were getting a GI Bill check every month, and you had to make a little more money to make things work out. But it wasn't that much different, except that you didn't have a chance to get involved in a lot of the fraternity type stuff, and I wasn't too keen on it anyway, so it didn't bother me too much. So in the spare time, you worked when you didn't have to study. You could do a lot of studying on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it worked out pretty good.
And when we were at Lincoln, did you further solidify this notion that you want to be a journalist?
Absolutely. And we had people come in, from different publications. People would come in from the Chicago Defender. They were quite friendly, cooperative with Lincoln at that time. People would come in from the Pittsburgh Courier to talk to us. I remember one of the guys who was really interesting to me, George Schuyler.
Oh God, the conservative who wrote
Yeah.
the Pittsburgh Courier.
Yeah, at the time, man, he was a great conservative guy, and I
Yes,
was
I
more on the
remember.
liberal side. But I was very interested in his work. He sort of backed up a lot of the stuff that he was talking about. He traveled all over and did a lot of stuff. Although we weren't on the same page, as far as our thoughts about different things. He was a good writer, and he could convince people. He convinced a lot of people. He could put stuff together, and we just had a lot of people come in.
It's amazing you mentioned him because
Uh,
I read him growing up in Pittsburgh Courier too.
oh
And
yeah.
my stepfather would talk about him. He said, look, he has a different point of view, but you learn about the world with him. He must have traveled a lot.
He did.
Okay, because
And
I remember that as a kid. I
yeah,
remember that.
he did. He did. He had a daughter who was a musician.
I saw a picture of her. She was beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we had an opportunity to meet with a lot of people who were experienced in the field and talk to them and get ideas from them, thoughts from them, that sort of thing. So I don't think I would have been better off at any big school because I was a little bit on the shy, quiet side anyway. But we took up the whole gamut there. You had access to people who were experts in all areas of the business.
So you got a chance to go to Tri-State Defender now because of the relationship you already had.
Well, we put in applications, you
Okay.
know.
Mm-hmm.
No, I didn't know L. Alex Wilson at all.
Okay.
My wife knew about him.
Mm-hmm.
I found out about him later, you know. Man, he was a guy who took a real licking down at Little Rock, you know. But I didn't know him at all. But after my bio information went out, resumes went out, he was the first guy who offered me a job.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't want to get bypassed, man. So I was on my way to Memphis.
Big bucks. How much big bucks were those days?
Yeah, like $50 a week. That's what they. That's what
$50 a week.
Yeah, that's what they were like, man. When you started out in some places, you know, it was a grind for a while. But L. Alex Wilson was quite an editor. He was one of those real brave guys who had been in the military, and he knew how to get along with people. You know, we would be fighting the crump machine, and we would be fighting other people, and he could still talk to these people and have peace with these guys, you know, while we were banging away at them at the same time. And we were pretty close because he had found a place for me to live down there when I came in. And sometimes we would drive, he would ride home with me, whatnot. And there was things you don't know about people, you know, sometimes until something happened, you know. And something happened one night at a place that we had stopped to for him to pick up some stuff. And next thing I knew, man, some guy came running out behind him waving a pistol, you know.
Whoa.
I said, what the heck is going on here, you know? And I jumped out of the car, you know, hey, man, be cool. It's all right here. And, you know, we rode sort of quietly for a while. And after a while, you know, I said, what the devil was this all about? Well, it was something, L. Alex Wilson was a guy who, when he was in Leesburg, he was one of those guys who was outspoken. He would write stuff, do stuff. And at one point, the KKK rode, and he ran. And he decided after that incident that he would never, ever run in a situation like that. So that's why he wasn't running from this guy who was threatening him with a weapon. And I had never heard that story until I was trying to find out what this was all about. And but that was something that was in him, that he would never run in a situation like that. And that day down in Little Rock, when the mob attacked 4 of us, he wouldn't run. Man, he just walked along. They would climb on his back and they hit him with bricks, they kicked him in his stomach. I don't know if you saw any of the pictures that ran in the book, The Race Beat.
Yeah, I got
They,
it. Pulitzer on a Pulitzer Prize.
yeah,
Gene Roberts.
yeah, Gene Roberts. They had those pictures in that book of him, and Jimmy Hicks and I ran along. You know, you get to the bottom of the hill, you see a policeman there, you think he might get a little help. The policeman kicks off his motorbike and rides off, you know, so you're pretty much on your own, man. And FBI guys come around later that night, you know, to ask you what you saw. And I saw you over there, you know. You were just looking, man. So that was the kind of situation it was. And people later told me how Alex would stand up to stuff down there. And he himself mentioned that he was never going to run again.
Wow.
I didn't know how badly he had been. I took a few licks, man, you know, but I'm not about trying to fight any mob, you know, and I'm not going to stand there and get whooped up on if I can help it. So I didn't know. After I did some work, you know, and got some stuff off, I went to see him. Man, he was all puffed up. I didn't realize how badly he had been beaten until I went to see him that night and talked to him. And that was a pretty tough situation there.
Describe to me what you saw. How badly was he being?
Well, he was all puffed up. His lips were puffed up. His jaws, his cheeks were larger than they should have been. A couple of knots on his head, and that sort of thing. And and he was still trying to do his work. You know, it was, man, he was one tough geezer, boy. I'll tell you, man. But it was. In those days, you could run into problems of that sort, you know. I know my very first day at Little Rock, I'm walking out on the street in front of Central High School, and the colonel who's in charge of the National Guard, Governor Faber's, they called him out the night before. You know, he comes out and he meets me out in front of the school, and I'm showing him credentials and things, and he's telling me that just my presence up in the area out in front of the school was a problem. So he didn't give me some troops. He got 3 or 4 troops together. You know, they marched me out of the area.
Your first day?
My first day, my very first day there. And it was some days later when Mrs. Daisy Bates decided it was time for the kids to go up and try to enroll. You know, I'd spent time doing stories in the community and that sort of thing, and watching the kids, and they would hang around Daisy Bates, and they'll see Bates home most of the time. So you got a lot of time to get to know all the kids that way. But that morning up there, we're coming up, I guess 16th Street was the street closest to the school that you walked up. Park Avenue ran across the front of the school. And we were walking up 16th Street, and we got a mob of people over here. And they're just hurling all kind of insults and all kind of stuff, you know, you pulling out credentials and stuff hanging around their neck. That didn't mean anything to them, man. So before we got up to Park Avenue, which ran across the front of the school, someone up front yelled that they're in our school. You know, they got in. And boy, the mob went crazy, man. They started attacking us, you know, like we were something good to eat, man. And it was a tough situation. We had a commercial photographer there who lived in Little Rock. And he ran off between, you know, some houses off to the side of the street there. They messed up his camera and all that kind of stuff. And Jimmy Hicks and I took a few licks, man, but we got away as best we could. Alex Wilson was left out there by himself, just walking, and wouldn't run. And
He wouldn't run?
No, he wouldn't run at all. After that Florida incident,
Yeah.
he was serious, man. He said he would never run again in a situation like that. So he just walked along and took it, man. And it was a tough time out there. But Little Rock.
You said that you took a few licks. I mean, were you?
Yeah, well, they get a chance.
What you call a few licks?
Well, they get a chance to hit you a couple of times, before you get away from them.
Uh-huh.
But Jimmy Hicks and I'm sure you know Jimmy Hicks.
I know worked with son Jonathan.
Amsterdam
in St.
News
Louis.
and those paid places. He's a pretty popular guy. He also was down on the Till trial with the group
So
of
you went
us.
to you were the Tri-State Defender when you covered Little Rock.
I was just out of the Tri-State Defender.
Okay.
That was my first job
All right.
with the Afro-American.
Okay. Let me back a minute. All right. Now, when you were a Tri-State Defender,
Yeah.
is that when you covered Tim?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me
Yeah.
back a little bit. I'm gonna try to do this sequentially. I won't get lost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a Tri-State Defender. Let's back up. We'll come back to Little Rock.
Okay.
What was your first significant story you wrote for the Tri-State Defender?
I don't know. I guess I didn't look at them that way. Actually, I did everything. I did some of everything. L. Alex Wilson, myself, we were the only full-time editorial people there.
Okay.
And he was chief in charge of everything. So I got to cover sports. I got to cover the homicide, police beat. I got to cover churches. I got to cover some of everything. And, they had a big cotton parade thing down there, and the blacks had their own parade. So I covered some of everything. Baseball, basketball, football, crime scenes, and all that kind of thing.
Sounds like great training.
It was good training, and had a good guy, who sort of helped me along. And so, we would have someone who wrote women's news, and somebody did sports news also, and we had somebody who would help with other kind of things. We had a lot of columns coming in from people from Arkansas and other areas that we had to read and rewrite sometime, and, sort of edit as best we could. So it was a small editorial group, but yeah, people did church news and all that kind of stuff on a part-time basis. Many of them were teachers or people who worked in the school system.
I've always liked Memphis.
Huh?
I always liked Memphis.
How was Memphis?
Yeah, I liked it. When I went to school in Eastern Tennessee at Knoxville College.
Oh,
so
okay.
it's like Tennessee is like three states. You got the Knoxville, you got Nashville, and you got Memphis in the west.
Yeah.
And of the three, I like Memphis the most.
Yeah, well, Memphis is good. Beale Street.
Yes.
Yeah, about Beale Street, and it was good. A lot of entertainment going on Beale Street down there, and my photographer friend Ernest Withers.
Yes.
He had a studio there.
Yes.
And Ernest was one of the guys who would go out and cover these sort of things. So normally, if I flew in, when I was there, he was always covering. He was always with us. And if I flew in when I was going to Mississippi on stories, I would normally stop by his shop on the way and rent a car in Memphis, and drive down to Mississippi. But Memphis was a great training situation. A lot of politics going on. It was basically a democratic city, but we had pretty strong Republican group there. George Lee, he was the big guy. He was an insurance guy, and he spoke at Republican conventions and that sort of thing. And he was fairly much in charge of appointments and things over in the west area over there where we were in the Memphis area. And
what do you make of the allegation that Winters kind of lived a double life? He was a spy, he was doing all this other thing. A big controversy about all that.
yeah, I
What you
didn't.
doing?
Oh yeah, I knew Withers for a long time. 5 years while I was working there, and off and on when we would travel through. Uh, I didn't think too much of it.
Mm-hmm.
People called me about it, and that's basically what I said. Uh, Here's the situation. Martin Luther King, all these guys who were working in civil rights, they wanted people to know when they were coming. They wanted people to be aware of it. That's how they made, they did their work, and they could speak at these churches and things and get money and that sort of thing. Uh, I never did understand from anybody exactly what Withers had to give them that was so great. Called some sort of a traitor or something like that. I know he had inside contact with a lot of people who came because he made a lot of pictures on all sports and civil rights people and everybody. But I never had a real hard statement on the charges they were making against him, except that they were claiming that he was providing information and doing double roles. But I didn't know any civil rights people who were sneaking into town, who were trying to hide their presence. Most people knew where they were going to be staying. If you came to Boston, if you came to Memphis, you only had a few places where you were going to stay. And one of them was the place where King was assassinated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, we were always there, we sold papers there and covered events there. A lot of meetings were held there and that sort of thing. So I really don't know exactly what they think he was providing them that would have been of some great merit.
Mm-hmm.
Some people saw it as an opportunity to jump on Withers, but I wasn't part of that group, and I don't. I knew his family quite well,
Mm-hmm.
so I would have needed more than anybody told me to put a lot of stake in it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying he didn't talk to people,
Right.
that sort of thing, but the FBI went around talking to everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and different people, try to elicit information and that sort of thing. But I really don't know what it is that he would have provided that would have been so sensational for the kind of reaction it got in the publications.
Gotcha. Now, how long had you been with Tri-State Defender when you went to cover the Emmett Till trial?
Well, I went there straight out of school in the summer of '52,
Mm-hmm.
and the trial was in '55, right?
Yeah, 55.
In '55.
Yeah.
So I had been there, I guess, about three years, I
All right.
suppose.
So, what did you know when you first got the assignment?
Well, what happened, we saw a little squib. I don't know if it's in the Commercial Appeal or the Press Cemetery, and probably mentioned on radio WDIA, which was the big broadcast station covering that area. It was manned mostly by black staffers. I don't know if it got the first inkling there, but the moment I heard that he had said something to some white woman and he was missing, I went down immediately to Money, where I had a chance to shoot pictures around there. That was a place where you could drive through almost and miss it if you didn't look for it. And I went out to the home where Mose Wright lived, and man, they hadn't even made up the bed where the boy was sleeping at that time. I just took pictures of everything and talked to Mose Wright. When the problem came up, his wife got out there right away. And it was just him and the boys there. And he was sticking around because he had a good crop of cotton. And he was sharecropping with this German guy. And he wanted to get in as much money as he could, from that crop. So I went out to his house and talked to him. I talked to the sheriff, George Smith, whose office had arrested the killers. And other people around there who was involved. But this thing happened, I believe, on August the 28th
It was. That was
when he was
exactly.
taken away.
Sure.
By September the 19th, they were ready to go to trial.
Mm-hmm.
It was the weirdest thing to do. One of the quickest big-time trials I had ever been familiar with, where people were ready to go to trial so quickly. But L. Alex Wilson was in charge of the team, the Chicago team. They sent people from Chicago and other places because Till was from Chicago. And so we had a team of people down there. And I was there, I guess maybe 3 days, during the trial. But one of us, Alex me, had to be back at the defender to send copy to Chicago where we were being printed. The first time I noticed that this was going to be a bad trial, as most of them were involving blacks and whites at that time. I had been down there to cover a funeral of George W. Lee, who was killed because he was trying to help black people to vote. A lot of us came down because that was the first time that the new NAACP chief was to be down in Mississippi to make a speech or to cover a funeral or something of that nature involving one of his people. And there's another guy who was killed also shortly for helping people to vote. And that was just before the Till thing happened. So the first thing we noticed when we got down there is that Sheriff Strider, who would testify on behalf of the guys who did the killing, he hadn't come up with a lot of witnesses. People thought there were some witnesses that needed to be looked into. It happened that Congressman Charles Diggs had got permission from the judge to come down as someone to sit in on the trial. So he was there, and the first thing that happened is that I was selected as one of as the person who would go out as sort of a pool reporter to go out around some of the plantations out there to try to locate some witnesses. NAC people were playing a big role in this thing. And it was the first time and the last time that I ever changed clothes on any assignment. Usually I wore what I wore around the office, but they thought it would have been safer for us if we put on some old clothes, type of stuff that people might be wearing around those plantations. And we had the woman there, Ruby Hurley, I believe. She was in the Birmingham office of the NAACP, and Medgar Evers was driving the car. We went on around these plantations. He seemed to know everybody in the state, man. He was the state secretary for the NAACP. And we came up with a couple of witnesses, one of them being the young fellow named Reed, who actually testified, and a woman who testified. A couple of people didn't testify at the trial. But after that, man, the first day of the trial, you walk up there and this sheriff meets you and tells you straight up, there would be no integration in this courtroom. I've got a press table set up over there for white folk, and you guys will sit out in the audience where you can, get yourselves a seat out there. And he was serious about it. And it turns out that this press table thing was a big problem for you. You know, you can't hear so much out in the crowd as well as you could at a well-positioned press table. Diggs and some of the real guys who had been around a long time went to the judge about it, and eventually he set off a table, 2 or 3 tables off at the side over there, so that we would actually have some place to work, some place to write, that kind of stuff. And Diggs was over that way. Du Bois' mother was over that way. That's where we all sat over there when we were there. And the trial, I think people gave the judge a pretty good mark for the way he handled the trial. But in those days, a judge could do that because he knew pretty much what the jury was going to do. And there wasn't any question about what was going to happen, you know. These guys sat up there and it was sort of entertaining to see how they were so pretty much cocky sure that they were going to be set free, you know. Sort of sad too. But we sat through the trial, and I wasn't there the day they announced the decision, but there were reporters from all over. And I think up until that time, the black media had been carrying the heaviest load on civil rights coverage and that sort of thing. This brought in a whole lot of people from the big press. And after that, they started setting up bureaus and things down there to cover civil rights and some of the protests that were going on down there. But it was sort of a tense situation for me, sort of early in my career. But people like L. Alex Wilson, who had been around a lot of these things and had been in the military, he didn't find it that tense, you know. But for me, it was a pretty tense situation down there.
What was the atmosphere like when you were going in there, in the courtroom?
Yeah, it was sort of, this was not unusual, you know, for blacks to be separated off and having to sit in the audience or something like that. I remember covering a case down in Tallahassee, Florida, where a black co-ed had been assaulted by some white guys. And it's pretty much the same story. You know, you sitting in the balcony or wherever you could find a seat there. Sometime in some places you would run into a guy where the bailiff was sort of okay with you sitting someplace other than that. But that was the norm. But most of them didn't just come out and tell you straight up, you know, that there'd be no integration in here. It was pretty much, you know, it was set up that way. But covering the trial, you know, you sat through an awful lot of stuff. Something that started off being a whistle or something of that nature on the part of the young man turned into something more nasty inside the courtroom. The woman who was the victim told a whole lot of different things about what happened and all that kind of stuff. That was pretty nasty. The judge didn't let it in the record. You know, the jury was out when she told that story. But it was enough to make some of the people there get a little nervous about what might happen, you know.
Where'd you stay when you were there?
Huh?
Where'd you stay with Dr. Howard?
No, I stayed with someone whose name I don't remember now. But there's a few places where you could stay. When we covered those stories in the South, you know, you didn't have a public accommodations law at that time. Right. You stayed where you could, you know. You called in ACP, or you would call a funeral home director, or you would call a church secretary or somebody and try to locate a place where you could stay. But I was going back to Memphis pretty often too. I don't know if I stayed in Clarksdale or someplace else at this time, but we stayed in the neighborhood, in the area down there. But I don't know, you know, sometimes some of the scariest situations were not on the scene where you were working, but traveling back to where you were staying. I remember when I covered Clinton, Tennessee, I had to be over there early in the morning. I'd walk down Foley Hill with those kids because the mob people, protesters would line up on the other side of the street. And I'd walk down between, the kids who were walking down the sidewalk and those people. And evening time, you had these guys coming down out the mountains, man. I don't know if you know that area out there with all these mountains and things. They'd be shooting off weapons and shooting off firecrackers and stuff. And I'm living in Knoxville. That's about 18 miles away. And I'm telling you, man, those drives back home to where you were boarding, it could be kind of scary, man. You didn't want to get stopped by anybody. You didn't want to get stopped by policemen, man. There's a lot of things happened to people who got stopped out there on the road. You might remember the woman from Detroit.
Yeah,
people.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So it was driving that 18 miles or wherever you had to go when you covered stuff and that kind of thing. And I don't know, it sort of being a people person, it was kind of sad, sometimes those kids, and the kids really were carrying the load of this thing, man. Some of them were pretty young, and like they would ask you, will you be out there tomorrow? But the Afro-American, we didn't have the kind of budget that you could stay there forever, man.
Right.
So you gotta,
So when you went to cover the Till trial, at any point did you really fear for your life?
Not really. After covering a lot of those things, I may have been wrong about this, but I got the feeling that those mobs and those people were more interested in killing and hurting people who were part of the demonstrations than in hurting and killing news people. What they wanted to do to us, I got the feeling, is that they wanted to scare us enough to keep us from doing our jobs. And that wasn't going to happen, You had a job to do if you decided to do that kind of work, and you were going to do your job, no matter what they were doing. But I can only remember one reporter actually being killed out there, and that was at Ole Miss tonight when they had that big shootout down there. And I was Jimmy Hicks again that time. We were down there together. This guy who was working for the French news agency, he got killed out there that night. As I recall it, and I may be wrong about this, but a lot of reporters got beat up and chased around and scared to death and that sort of thing. A few northern reporters decided they didn't want to stick it out and they'd go back home, And I only know a couple of cases like that. But most of the time, the guys who were doing that kind of work knew what to expect, and they did the best they could to avoid problems.
When you first interviewed Mose and the people there in Money, Mississippi, what was going through your mind? Do you think?
I'm sorry, what was that?
When you first interviewed Mose, right, and the people around Money, what were you making at the time? Because it's easy to look back later on. What did you make of the case?
Well, what was going on? This guy was trying to work his cotton field. He lived in a little frame house right near the road there. And most of my interview took place out there where they were working. I mean, people would go by in cars and they would yell stuff and all that kind of thing. But Mose Wright was always telling me, don't worry about it. Everything's gonna be okay, And I don't, the only weapons I ever saw around his house, he had a shotgun in one corner there. But I knew a couple of the guys who stayed pretty close to him who were picking cotton out there. I just assumed that, somebody had some coverage there. Guys did that or they were supposed to be nonviolent, but these guys weren't part of the nonviolent group. Just looking at him, he was a brave guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he felt in his heart that in some way he had let Emmett Till down because they came to his house to get Emmett Till. And I think he sort of felt a remorse about that. But he talked about anything. He answered any of the questions that I asked him.
Mm-hmm.
We went in the house and, circled around. But I found out one thing, that all the bravery, he and his sons were not living in that house at night. They would go someplace else to stay at night, which was a wise thing for them to do. But he was quite a guy, man. They called him preacher and everything. But as they did a lot of people, if you were either a principal or a teacher or a preacher, if you had wore a suit down there. So,
why do you think that case resonated then and later? Was it because of the casket and the disfigured body? Did you go to the funeral?
No, I didn't.
Just from the trial.
Yeah, they had Chicago people
right.
covering that end.
But why do you think that case, through all the history, is just still, people still talk about it?
I think it was because we were at a point where a lot of demonstrations were taking place. An awful lot of people had become fed up with what was going on. Mm-hmm. And in this situation, they killed a kid. He got 14 years old, something like he just turned 14 years old. And they murdered him. And I think a lot of young people and other people decided that if they were going to be killing our kids that way, it was time to take a more forceful view of what was going on. And I think people over in Hoxie, which was the first integration case, school integration case I covered, they had been inspired to do something because of that case. Mm-hmm. And it just shook the world. We had press there from all over everywhere to cover that trial. Racism itself was bad enough, and people had been lynched on all kind of situations, that kind of stuff. But usually, it wasn't a kid who was supposed to have whistled at a white woman. Mm-hmm. And I just think that set off a whole lot of interest in what was going on, and it made a lot of young people upset. You saw the people later, who started sit-ins.
Right.
Young people.
Did you get the impression that they were just trying to send a message like, if you cross this line, we don't care how young you are, you're going to pay for it with your life? Mississippi, white Mississippi.
Well, I don't know if those two guys were doing that particularly.
Okay.
I just think they were people who were incensed at what had happened. Those two guys were off peddling stuff or doing something.
Marlon and Bryant.
Yeah. At the time it happened.
Right, this is right.
And they really didn't know about it until some kid started shooting off his mouth.
Exactly.
Now, here was always a strange thing to me about that case is that the woman was there who was supposed to have been insulted.
Carolyn Bryant. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and her, I guess her relative, her half-brother's wife,
right, exactly.
Juanita, was sort of looking out for her. But when those guys returned, neither one of them said anything about that situation to them. And it wasn't until some young guy broached the subject and they heard about it. And they didn't go immediately to do it,
Right.
But they were personally sending a message as far as their family was concerned. Mm-hmm. And Milam, he was a pretty rough guy anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think they were trying to send a message. They had been hanging black people for years in rape type cases,
Mm-hmm.
those
Mm-hmm.
kind of things. So it was not unusual for someone to take action in a situation like that. I just think, you know, the timing of it and the way people were looking at things and getting more involved in standing up for their rights. You know, you had this voting thing going on, and you had just had 2 people killed not far from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Courthouse
Biloxi.
theft.
Yeah.
Georgia.
So people were really trying to bring about some changes.
When you look back on your career, is that one of the highlights of your career?
I think that would have been one. But I think the Freedom Ride was more of
Okay,
a
well, we're gonna get to that.
yeah,
Okay.
right.
All right. So we got there. You left, and what year did you join the AFRO?
57.
How did that happen?
Well, I was leaving the Defender,
Mm-hmm.
and I had put in applications at a few places.
So what happened? You decided you want to leave the Defender?
Well, I was born and reared on the East Coast,
Mm-hmm.
and time came eventually. I was working pretty hard. I had got myself up to $75 a week.
No, you made big. Well,
Hey,
that's like
man,
50%
on the
increase.
road, man. And it seemed to me that, you know, it was time for me to try to get someplace where opportunities might be a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided I would try to strike out and do something. I know the paper was one of the papers that was really involved in almost everything. You know, they had sent guys to World War II and done everything, and it was a great location. You know, you're next door to Washington. New York is just up the hill, and I'd like to hang around the United Nations and some of the stuff that was going on. So it was a great place for me to be.
No, I mean this country boy stuff from you, but you say you like to hang out at the United Nations. Where did this breath come from that you had all these interests?
I don't know. I wanted the kids to have opportunity to see things and go places. And I guess for the first 10 years after they opened Disney World, we were down there.
Okay.
We would go up to New York and see a few plays or something like that before they got, you know, pricey out of the game. Oh man, it's awesome now. And when things would go on at the UN, I would go up sometimes. So I know Ali was speaking up there one time, and we were up there. It was sort of interesting to hear some of the stuff that's going on. But I spent a lot of time in Washington doing stuff with visiting the State Department, the briefings they were having. And I interviewed several of the new attorney generals that came in. Richardson.
Elliot Richardson, yeah.
Yeah, Elliot Richardson and Shane Dinks and Griffin Bell.
Georgia.
And I think one other, but I know at least those. We were always wanting to know what the civil rights agenda was for their administrations and what they were going to do about black judges and that sort of thing. So I would get these opportunities. That's what I say. You're close to Washington, you can get in and interview attorney generals and that sort of thing. So
Tell me what AFRO was like then when you first joined.
oh man, the AFRO was it was just an ideal place to work. The family was into doing things. The family believed in covering colored people and their interests around the world. And, I end up, Nigeria and Cuba and South Africa, places like that.
You went all those places at AFRO.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. I interviewed the chief military guy who was in charge of Nigeria, Gowon.
Mm-hmm.
I had hit Dodan Barracks. They had an interview set up there and interviewed him. But that paper was, I thought, one of the best on doing that kind of coverage. And we found all kind of ways to get stories done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when they was having this stuff about Route 40, and they wouldn't serve black people out there, but they would serve ambassadors from Africa because they were interested in putting on a good face at that time in the State Department. Well, the AFRO went out and rented some limousines and rented some garb that would be worn by African dignitaries and that sort of thing, and went out on Route 40, got served, and wrote a big story, about the way the government would treat other people but not treat its own citizens, that
That's
sort
a
of
great
thing.
story.
Yeah, that AFRO, and you know, you cover these civil rights stories, and one of the most interesting ones that I did that was not a big thing for everybody, and this happened just before the Freedom Riders started. I had agreed to go down to New Orleans to cover United States civil rights hearing on voters' rights. And one of the things that came up while we were there is that this voter registrar was just testifying over and over how she would give this simple little test about government stuff and a few other little simple questions. And all the white folks could pass it, but none of the black applicants could pass it. So at length, the civil rights lawyers started asking her some questions. And some of them was these simple questions she said that black people couldn't answer, and similar questions. And she sat up there, she couldn't answer any of them, not one of them. And so over the story, we had this big story on the front page with Afro-Americans saying, Dixie vote official flunks on test. And that was one of the last stories I did, I guess, before I went on the Freedom Ride.
Man, I'm listening to you talking there, and I'm listening to commitment that AFRO had to news.
Oh yeah, it was.
And it's hard for me. I'm gonna be honest with you, Moses.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine that.
Yeah, the AFRO even had some of its employees or some of the family members would be involved in suits that were filed, you know, against others, and sending people to all the war zones in World War II. They were in it. They sent them. In fact, they had a little publication. This is our War II or something like that. That chronicled where these various people served in the war. And it was a paper that did a lot of things that a lot of people may not know about. But when I was with the Afro-American, we had 13 editions. 13 editions. We came out twice a week in Baltimore, twice a week in Washington. We had the national edition, went out early, the first paper out. Then we had the office in Richmond, they had an office in Newark, they had an office in Philadelphia, we had a New England edition, and we had North Carolina, South Carolina editions, of course, and we had one on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. So it was a big publication. It reached a lot of people. We had a lot of stringers. We didn't have staff people in all those areas, but we could call on some of those people from time to time to do work for us. We had the guy, oh man, to go my names again, the guy in France, who covered so much for the AFRO. He entertained a lot of people who came from the States, who took him around the jazz place. He was sort of a ambassador, you know, for the AFRO, for people coming abroad. But I could call him if something happened in Germany or something, and I wanted somebody to go over and take a look at it. I could call him and he'd go over and send stuff for.
That's an enormous commitment, a financial commitment.
Yeah, Lacey covered most of, well, a lot of the Olympics. Just wrote reams of stuff, you know, that other people weren't covering from our angle. You know, he followed those people. He had they have the Lacey Room here. I don't know if you've seen it. I think he probably did as much as anybody on getting Jackie Robinson and some of the others in, and he followed them. Went to their summer camps and training camps. He went down Cuba and the Dominican Republic with those people and covered them. And some of his columns, man, were just biting, you know. The book I helped him write, we carried about 14 of the columns that he had written. And I was at the Hall of Fame, Baseball Hall of Fame, when he got inducted up there. You know, it was a great day, man. But he was a real sports guy. He went to an owners meeting in Detroit to pitch for blacks being taken into Major League Baseball. And
Owners meeting?
Huh?
At the owners meeting?
At an owners meeting. Nobody else did that. Sam Lacey did that. And as a, you know, a news guys who did that. He was appointed to baseball committee on the integration of baseball. But, you know, there was somebody representing the American League, somebody representing the National League, and a couple of people, Sam Lacey and a judge from Philadelphia. But the guy who was supposed to represent the American League never showed up for any meetings, so they couldn't really do business. And of course, the Dodger guy decided, you know, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And, you know, and that's how Jackie Robinson got selected.
How long had you been here when you was sent to Little Rock?
When I went to Little Rock?
Yeah.
Actually, I hadn't moved my family here.
You hadn't?
At the time.
Uh-huh.
No. I was still in Memphis, living in Memphis. I had come up to the AFRO and gone through tests that they give and covered some stories, did some writing and that sort of thing.
You gave your test?
Oh yeah, you had to take a test on different kind of stories. They sent you out with some of their people.
Okay.
Sent you out by yourself.
Uh-huh.
And you wrote stories and turned them in. You know, we had that horseshoe thing,
Exactly.
desk there, and the paper there at that time. And they would take you in to see Dr. Carl Murphy, the famous editor and publisher of the paper. That's when you were hired, you know. So I was supposed to, you know, come up a little bit later, but then Little Rock broke. So I was covering that from Memphis, basically.
Now, how long were you in Little Rock?
Ooh. Maybe couple of weeks, I guess. Because when I first got there, I think I went back to Memphis for a while. But see, they had all these little cases going on. Every time they thought they had things settled, the governor or somebody else would come up with something else and they were back in court again. So you wanted to sit in on some of those. Little Rock was supposed to be sort of advanced in race relations at that time. So I'd go around and talk to a lot of people in the community and that sort of thing. So I did a lot of work at the newspaper that was Elsie and Daisy Bates' paper at that time. I would write stories up there and that sort of thing. But I spent a lot of time around their home where the kids would be all the time.
How did you get the reputation of being a little more advanced in the race, Arkansas?
Well, they had some mayors down there who, for that time, were sort of, they were being considered moderates, that sort of thing. And, you know, actually, this integration of Central High School had been pretty much approved by everybody until one day some guys started complaining about this was going to take place, and Governor Farbus jumped up overnight and said it wasn't going to happen. And that's when all the trouble broke out, man.
Describe for me what it was like seeing the hatred on the people's face there in Little Rock, the mobs.
It was just sort of devastating. This was 1957, and we considered that we had been making some progress. On that corner that I mentioned to you before, 16th and Park, I don't know if the lady lived there or not, or whether she was just up there on the occasion. But when we were up there, when the kids got into the school and the National Guard, the military troops had settled things down. Man, she was just up there wringing her hands and crying because they're in our school. And you could just see the hatred and disrespect for people. And it was all over the place. And the game was such that after the military took over, and a lot of the white kids were coming out of school, right there on that same corner, there were young white guys who had come out of the school. They were inspiring young white students who had come out, not to clear the sidewalks. It was a test for the military, and they knew that because, you know, they didn't figure nothing was going to happen to those young ladies, the young white ladies. And to my shock, his guy called the orders, man, and he warned them to move. They wouldn't move. And, you know, he did this lower gun thing, firewood, hup, and they just started moving. A couple of girls got punched. You know, they made big stories out of it, you know, attacking the girls and all that kind of stuff. But they actually inspired that thing. They set that thing up. I'm right there watching them, you know. They set that kind of stuff up. But I don't know. The thing that those kids went through in that school, man, it was just awful. And I never had contact, I don't think, with any of them after that except for Green, who lived in Washington, had some high jobs there and that sort of thing. Yeah. I'd get in touch with him from time to time. I went back down there, and that's the only place I went back to, one of these places that I had covered. I went back down there with the NAACP 30 years later. Jimmy Williams was with the NAACP then, in charge of communications and whatnot. And he wanted me to do a story 30 years later sort of thing. And that's when I realized the change. The Clintons were in power then. They had the NAACP board out at the State House, and all the 9 of the kids were out there. And they just told stories about what it had been like and what they had done since then and that sort of thing. And that's when I realized how damaging some of these stuff could be to young people. And it grew out of a situation while the kids were trying to get into school. For some reason, after Mrs. Bates had decided they would not go up one morning, one young lady didn't get the message. I think there was a telephone problem or something. And she goes up there. Her name was Elizabeth Eckford. She's all alone, and she tried to get through the National Guard people. One wouldn't let her through, so she tried another one. And that's when she realized they weren't there to help her. They weren't her friends. And she started walking back, trying to catch the bus out. And a group of people just sort of surrounded her and gave her an awful hard time, called her names and all that kind of stuff. And her knees were almost to buckle on her. She finally got back to the bus stop, and there was another white woman who came over and sat down with her and rode part of the way on the bus with her. Okay, I wasn't up there that morning because the kids weren't supposed to be up there.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I heard about it, I went out to see her. And of course, her parents weren't anxious for her to be talking to anybody at that time, but I had been around the kids a lot and she knew me, so she said she would talk to me. And she was telling me the kind of things that I was saying about her knees were buckling, that sort of thing. And at one point, she said, I just didn't know people could be so cruel. And that was the lead on my story, and it was the headline that ran across across the paper. But then, this 15-year-old girl told me, as soon as Mrs. Bates said we can go back, I'm going. Excuse me. And that was one of the few times I stopped writing and just listened to her talk. And 30 years later, and I tell you, I went back down there. Ernest Green set up an opportunity for me to talk to her for a few minutes. And she had been missing a lot of the events that the other 8 kids went to. And she was so affected by what those people did to her. She was still suffering from that. And that was one of the great tragedies, man, I thought, of individual suffering from those kind of attacks.
Wow. Any particular significance of having covered Little Rock in terms of your career? Did it? You had already been the money. You ever covered Emmett Till, and you covered there. You know, it's almost like covering a war zone, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes it felt like it. I'll tell you, people ask me sometimes, were you scared out there? I say, well, sometimes. But there were a lot of times out there when you thought you would have been better off someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
That would take place in a lot of situations out there, you know.
Did you feel a sense of duty, though, covering that?
Yeah, a sense of responsibility, getting that stuff in history from my community's point of view. And you felt it particularly when you were covering stories in some areas like in Mississippi, where the papers were actually campaigning against progress. Those 2 daily papers in Jackson, Mississippi, they were tough, man. Mm-hmm. They were awful. And you ran into that a lot, where you were reporting the story one way and someone else was reporting it another way. And I think people talk a lot about objectivity and that sort of thing, but sometimes it's what you see from your perspective and what you gain from certain things from your perspective that is how your stories turn out. Mm-hmm. and what you write about certain situations.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about the Freedom Ride, because that was That was an exciting time for me. I was really following that, particularly when the bus came to Anniston.
Yeah. The freedom rides I had agreed to do. Uh, James Farmer was trying to get media people to go along on what was supposed to be a 2-week journey uh, through the South to test whether or not the laws on desegregation, integrating buses was actually happening. Uh, they were leaving on May 4th. It turns out that I had come back from that story I was mentioning in New Orleans about the voter registration hearing and in the office. So I skipped a couple of days there. I caught up with them in Greensboro at the college there.
A&T, North Carolina.
A&T.
We're talking 1960.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
1961, I guess it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was it was conducted this way. The only team of reporters, I was there for the Afro-Americans. Simeon Booker and Ted Gaffney were working for publications. And there was a white woman who was a freelancer out of New York who was making the trip. What they did, we were on 2 different buses, a Greyhound bus and a Trailsway bus. And they would go to these places, and certain people had been delegated to go in as an integrated team and sit in the black area, sit in the white area, and see what happened. And it went on that way. The further south we got, the tougher it was getting. When we got to a little place in South Carolina, Rock Hill, North Carolina, after the first time I saw any blood spilled on anybody, and that involved John Lewis, who was then a student who was applying for some sort of study grant. And he went in with somebody else, and they attacked them, something awful. And a couple of whites ran in to try to help out, and they attacked them also. And that was the first time we really had some violence that was really pretty rough. There had been some charges along the way. Some guy getting his shoes shined and got arrested and that sort of thing. But at Atlanta, we ran into a situation where our leader, his father died, and his mother wanted him back in Washington. And the group agreed that James Farmer should go back. So everywhere we stopped along the way, they would pick up additional people who would go along to test these places. In Atlanta, Martin Luther King Jr. and some of his people came over for the dinner. And King let the word out that he had heard that the Freedom Riders were not going to get through Alabama alive. And that was to be our next stop into Alabama. So now we don't have James Farmer, who was there to settle things down when things got kind of rough out there. You get a danger spot, he'd be the first guy to go bulling in there, you know.
Farmer would. He put himself at the head of the line.
Huh?
James Farmer would put himself at the head of the line.
Oh yeah, he would do that in different places out there. But they would usually have 2 or 3 people going in, and others wouldn't know who was on the bus, who was what. So after Dr. King told us that bad news about getting out of Anniston, getting out of Alabama alive, I was on Greyhound that day, and Booker's team was, they were on the other bus. And on the way to Anniston, which was going to be our first big stop, a bus flagged us down, a bus that was meeting us, and told us there was a pretty nasty mob up in Anniston. And sure enough, when we got there, there was a pretty angry mob up there. They started trying to break out the windows of the bus. They were calling us all kind of names, the N-word, communists, all that kind of stuff. And the station had actually closed, but the bus driver had to take care of a little business there anyway. So, and this woman sitting across the way from me, black woman, she was not a freedom rider. She didn't have any idea of what was going on. I think she was on her way home from a funeral. And she was down between the seats, man. She was just saying she didn't want to die there like that. Why are they doing this to us? And this was Mother's Day, you know. And so I went over and tried to explain to her, you know, what was going on and that sort of thing. And sort of calmed her down a bit. She told me it was okay if I used her name in my story, which I did. So eventually, the driver finished his work there and unlocked the door and got back in. I thought, man, we're getting out of here. And I looked back, as far as you could see, there's a string of cars following us. In front of us, there was this little roadster car with a few people in it. And they were swinging from side to side to keep the bus driver from passing them. So what had happened, they had punctured the tires. Among the things they were doing there, they had punctured the tires on the bus. And by the time we got to the edge of the city limits there, the tires went down. And they were all around this place, you know. They were trying to break out the windows again and threatening us in every way they could, you know. Come on out and integrate Alabama, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So eventually, we found out there were 2 state troopers on there, on the bus. We didn't know about these guys. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys, L. Cowlin, I always remember this guy, he pulled his pistol and stood in the doorway so they couldn't get in to get to us. And I'm sitting in a seat by myself. It's pretty rough when you're working with a camera around your neck out there. They sort of go for guys with cameras too. So I took my camera off and I stuck it beneath my seat. Mm-hmm. So eventually they broke through the window where I was sitting, and that's where they threw the bomb in, this fire thing that they had set up. And I got a few burns behind the ear and that sort of stuff, but nothing serious. But then, almost suddenly, this bus was almost filled with smoke, black smoke, dark smoke. And I didn't know who else was on there. I know that woman was over there. I didn't know if she was getting off or how she was getting off. Some people were able to get out of windows and caught rides on into Birmingham. I decided that I was going to be the last person off the bus. Particularly, I was thinking about that lady and a couple other people on there who were not freedom riders. And so I put a handkerchief over my mouth and got down kind of low and waited out. Then it started getting hot on the bus, you know, it was time to get off, man. So I got off, and there was the worst scene you could ever see. People stumbling around, crawling around on the ground, trying to get the smoke out of their chest, and just gagging, and I don't know, you never think Americans would be doing that to fellow Americans. And these people were not lawbreakers. You know, they were the one who was breaking the laws, you know.
Right.
So I was in good shape, pretty good shape for, you know, a little smoke on the chest and that sort of thing. So I helped the bus driver and one of these freedom riders to get the luggage out from under the bus before it really went up in flames. And I got a chance to interview this guy who had pulled his pistol and kept him from getting on the bus. And he said that it was some of the tough duty he had ever faced in his career. But those of us who were left there, some of them were freedom riders and not, we got taken to the hospital there in Anniston, Alabama. And the young guy who was the head guy, core guy on the Freedom Ride bus that I was on, he was calling around, all around, trying to find somebody who could get us out of there. The governor, police, city police said, we can take you out to the city limits. It's dark, man. These people are still outside hooping and hollering and carrying on. Oh, they want to drop us off at the city limits, you know. So we just sort of stuck there. And this guy's calling all around trying to find somebody to help him. And finally he got Reverend Fred Shuttleworth over in Birmingham. And he agreed to send a caravan of cars to get us out of there. And I don't know, we're trying to get things under control there. And the only telephone we could use there was the one that the guy was using to try to contact somebody to help us. Mm-hmm. And I had called my wife that morning before I left Atlanta. You know, it's been Mother's Day, you know, this kind of thing. And I know they're watching TV, and she knows I'm on one of those buses, man, and I need to call her. And I needed to talk to the paper, too, because our national edition went out on Sunday night. Mm-hmm. It was printed on Sunday night. We had the big presses in the building at that time. So I just stepped outside, took a chance. They had a payphone outside. And I called the guy who was night duty at the AFRO, told him what was going on, told him that what kind of story I would have the next day, and asked him to call my wife to tell her I was okay. So that was one phase of this thing. You would think that police, you get a guy who stands in the doorway to help you, and then there's another bus with other freedom riders on it that went into Birmingham. We had heard that the police commissioner and some others had made a deal with KKK and other mob people to stay away from the bus station for a certain length of time, 10 or 12 minutes, whatever it was. And they could do whatever they wanted with the freedom riders who were on the bus. And that's what happened, you know, and people always think that police, strictly police doing police work. But these police, all of them, stayed away from that train station while people were getting beat up. Stayed away from that bus station while people were getting beat up. And later, police chief said something to the effect that it was Mother's Day and a lot of the guys were off and that kind of nonsense. But, you know, everybody knew what they had done and it was reported.
This is Birmingham?
Yeah, yeah.
What did you see? You said they had this free fall.
Uh-huh.
It was a free fall before the cops came in the bus station of Birmingham.
Yeah. The people were getting off the bus there.
Tell me what you saw.
Well, I wasn't there.
Okay. Still an Anderson bus.
Yeah, I was on the Greyhound bus.
All right.
Simeon Booker and his photographer on that bus.
Okay.
And I heard later that you know, a couple of people got on before they got to the station and started beating up people.
Oh.
They had people in the aisle who were bleeding. This guy, James Peck, who was a
Yeah, I
Corps
saw
guy.
that's a famous picture with the
Oh
blood,
yeah,
the white
yeah.
guy.
Oh, he got
Yes.
beat up something awful, man.
I saw the picture.
Both on the bus and later. And the young guy, person, he was the youngest guy out there. I think he's about 18 when it started or something. He got beat up pretty badly. But that was the difference in how police will operate sometimes. One will save you, and the others desert you while you're getting beat up. But I was going to say about Simeon Booker, I heard later that he had a newspaper back there, and he cut a little hole in the newspaper so he could watch to see what was going on. And as soon as they got there, they got off the bus and got away. But they beat up people there, man. And the thing is that we were sort of trapped there. Bus drivers refused. They say, we're not hauling these people anymore. You know, we're not driving any bus with any Freedom Riders on it. And Kennedy, he got all upset, you know, who was the Attorney General at that time, you know. And Simeon Booker had some sort of relationship with him, so he would call him, you know, and talk to him about the situation we were in. But we got stuck there, and eventually, the next morning we had planned to leave by bus, and nobody would drive the buses, so we ended up having a little discussion on what would be done. And after it all, everybody had to sort of raise some money, pull some money together so that they could fly out. Going out to the airport, in the airport, those people were still there. These mob people were still there. And they're walking around, you know, I stand so that I'm standing against one of those high pillows so nobody could hit me from behind. And you just had to look out because they would walk through, you know, they just walk by and bop you, you know. So we were stuck there. And we finally got onto a plane. At that time, planes didn't come up to the doorway as they do now. You had to walk out on the tarmac and get on. And they were still out there. And then as soon as we got settled down, and once again, I said, boy, getting out of here. This is a bum scare. Mm-hmm. Everybody got to get off the plane and go back into the station. And they're still there. And we were stuck there for hours. And eventually, John Siegenthaler, who was working for Kennedy at the time for the Attorney General, he came in and helped smooth things out, make arrangements for us to get a flight out to New Orleans.
Wow.
And
because that's where the bus is supposed to end up, right? Go to New Orleans.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's where we're gonna. That's where it was supposed to end up anyway, and they was gonna have a big affair down there, a big meeting and that sort of thing. So it eventually took place a little earlier than we had thought. And I wrote a story about the incident, but I also did a little bot story saying it was all over. And it was a real tough situation. But before my story ran in the paper, these young folks from Nashville, Dinah Nash, and John Lewis, and some of those others, they said, can't end this way. You know, we can't let violence end this thing. And that's what happened in Little Rock when they talked Eisenhower into sending in the troops. We thought then that since the federal government had taken that position that violence would not be allowed to prevent people from having their rights in these situations, that it was pretty much so, you know. But no way. And those young people, boy, I guess you probably know that story, but they had a tough time too, man. And they had some hassle about whether they could get finance and whatnot there, and eventually somebody agreed to put up money so that they could go. And I've been on a few panels with Siegenthaler and the guys who wrote the book on race beat. And he always tell this story about how he was talking to Diane Nash and saying that you all are going to get somebody killed out there.
Mm-hmm.
And she was telling him, we all sign our wills and last wishes before we go on.
Yeah, I read that.
And yeah, he would tell that story. It was, but it was, they had a tough time, even the second part. I didn't go on the second part of that.
Mm-hmm.
We had different people covering some of those things. But that first part of it was pretty rough. A lot of the people who went on the second leg of it, man, ended up in jail down in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm. With the Parchment. They put
Yeah,
Parchment.
in that rough place,
Yes.
man, that really rough place
Yeah.
where they were.
When you what are other highlights other than the civil rights stuff that we've talked about that you really are proud of in terms of your career?
Well, I guess it was the whole ball of wax, because there was Crump in one place, and Baltimore had a boss also.
Mm-hmm.
So we were James Pollock, and we were always fighting to get that breakthrough where blacks who were not dedicated to the boss could get elected to offices. And that was a pretty tough battle, you know. It went on, and little by little, you know, they got a breakthrough on it. I don't know all the kind of stories that we did. You know, the AFRO ran that big clean block campaign, still runs it, where kids in the community and others would clean up, plant flowers and decorate things, and had the Miss Santa Claus program, you know, where they would raise food and have baskets, give money to people and that sort of thing. We wrote stories promoting that and that sort of thing. I had great cooperation from the National Guard. They would bring their trucks out and haul stuff around for us and get stuff done that way. But I don't know. I thought the stories with the attorneys generals were pretty important, particularly the one with Kleindienst, where they had this.
Nixon's guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
They had this very important black Republican who was a favorite of the administration. They had used him on special occasions, and he was eminently qualified for a judgeship. Both the senators in his state were supporting him. That's usually what you needed to get. Yeah. But it turns out that he wasn't really on board fully with Nixon's no-knock and preventive detention programs. And they cut him off, man. I mean, they just denied him, and they up front with it, you know. that was it, you know. So I guess there's a thing of being loyal to your administration and that sort of thing, but that was sort of a real bummer, you know, to see it happen the way it did. I think Griffin Bell was probably one of the interesting guys. Of course, my favorite, of course, was Richardson. They gave him some sort of job later up at the United Nations. And I went up to...
Why was he your favorite? Why was Richardson your favorite?
Well, he was a real straight shooter. And, you know, he would talk to you about things that they were trying to do and things they couldn't get done for one reason or the other. And he you know what, you set up these interviews, you know, they give you 20 minutes or something like that. But none of them ended that way, you know. You're talking to these guys about what they did and what they wanted to do and what they couldn't do and what they wouldn't do. And they would go on for quite a while, you know. But Richardson, as you know, he eventually got fired for not doing some dirty work that the administration wanted him to do. So he was a real straight shooter, and I liked him a lot. I think Griffin, he had pretty good stories to tell because they were really trying to get black judges on board during that administration.
Carter,
Yeah. And he could talk about what they had done and what they were going to continue to do and that sort of thing. But I always thought it was interesting to go to the people who were in charge of these things, you know, and get their viewpoint on it rather than take somebody else's viewpoint on what it was. I don't know, sometimes I think the press sort of let us down on some things, man.
Like what?
Well, I guess two things come to mind for me, and I may not be correct on either one of them, but I thought the case involving Professor Gates up at Harvard, I thought that was a case that there wouldn't really be any question about. Hey, the Supreme Court had ruled years ago. Other courts had ruled in specific cases involving policemen and citizens. And what the rulings were specifically and directly is that an American citizen could call a policeman a name, he could yell at a policeman, he could request a policeman to show his ID. And if there was no third person around who was agitated enough to take some silly action because of what had happened, there's no disorderly conduct. And I just couldn't understand. I couldn't find a single story in the New York Times or in the Washington Post where those court rulings were used, and they used reams and reams of stuff. And I thought it was, I just thought it was a disservice, and I wrote something about it, and AFRO ran it later on its website. I think the other one that is an ongoing story that sort of gets to me a little bit, and it was about this surge into Iraq. You know, the administration led us into a war that we really had no business getting into. They used all kind of false stuff to get us into the war. At some point, when the Shia government was begging the United States publicly not to do what it did over in Anbar, which is now a big problem. What we did, we were paying $300 a month to up to 100,000 people. These were people who were among the groups who were fighting the government in some way or the other. So we were undercutting the government, which was in power, the Shiites, on behalf of the Sunnis, who were in Anbar, basically. And the American people weren't getting that full story of what we were doing. And now you have people like our Arizona senator running around talking about what a great thing the surge was. Well, if you go in and hire all these people who were fighting against you and pay them a whole lot of money to stop fighting you, you know, and that was some retired journalists who spoke out against this thing at the time. But, you know, if you're getting pension and things, I don't suppose you can say too much about it. But I thought it was a bad thing not to fully inform the American people about what we were doing. Because now people are saying the guy in power doesn't trust the United States. Well, guess why? I mean, you were paying people to try to put him out of business. And so now we've got that mess over there where the Kurds are pretty much running their own country up in the north. The Sunnis are still killing people and working with Al Qaeda or somebody else to continue killing people.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a mess. And these people like the Arizona senator is running around talking about what a great success the surge was. But let me tell you something. We tried the surge in Afghanistan. We didn't have the same situation where we could buy these people,
Right.
you know, because they were sold out to the people who do the poppies and stuff, you know, that they work for. It didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
There was some lessening of war on a short basis after we hired all these people. I mean, these were people who knew who the enemy were, you know, the people who were fighting our troops.
Mm-hmm.
They could tell them where the weapon stashes were and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it looked pretty good for a while. But you were undermining the people who were in office. And they were publicly, strenuously urging you not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an untold story still to the extent that it should be told. And I don't quite understand how we avoid the coverage that it really deserved. I mean, you could send a bunch of troops to Afghanistan. You don't have the people there who are fighting you
Right.
to stop fighting you and show you where all the weapons and things were. And then now we're saying they're mistreating the Sunnis. They're not taking them and treating them the way they should. And they distrust the United States. Why not?
What is your overall impression of the job the media does today?
I think it depends case to case, but overall, I think they do a good job.
You do?
Yeah, overall. There's some situations where, as I just mentioned, I just think they do an awful job. But they dig into things and they bring out a lot of stuff that needs to be brought out. And on the whole, you know, I think they're doing a good job. There are some cases where personally, you know, I don't agree with the lack of coverage in some areas,
Mm-hmm.
but that could just be me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But the two cases I cite, I feel very strongly about those and the way the media handled it in the past and the way they're still handling the situation involving the government in charge over there and the Sunnis who really started the war up again.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they've been killing people, blowing up people ever since we got rid of the big tyrant over there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think things could have worked out better
Mm-hmm.
if we had not undercut the government the way we did and spent all that money. You know, imagine paying $300,000 a month to almost 100,000 people
That's a lot of money.
to undercut the government that we're supposed to be supporting.
Okay. What are you concerned about the black press and where it's going and where they'll be around?
Well, the black press basically was not as well financed throughout its history as it might have been. Could have been more effective with more financing. And I think now we have situations where some papers are still excelling. Some don't have the circulation that they once had,
Mm-hmm.
but in some way they are making it up with their websites and other opportunities. And I think the AFRO has done a good job on that because John Oliver III, Jr. Was one of the early people to get into internet website business. Uh, it's sort of a hit and miss situation. Some of the papers not as influential as they once were. And there's a reason for that because a lot of the mainstream media are covering stuff that they once did not cover. And I just think some of the papers, I think the Philadelphia Tribune, others out there doing great work. They are sort of thriving, at least standing with their heads above water. Some of them have lost their circulation, lost their impact. My old paper, the Chicago Defender, has had a pretty rough time. But I think they're going to be around, and I think they're going to be in a position to bring some pressure at different points. You can't have a paper like the Afro-American painting a different picture on different issues when they are right, and have the bigger media ignore it completely, as they once did. Somebody has to say something about these things, and I think they do play a good role in that way also. But a lot of people still depend on those papers. And every week, I subscribe to the AFRO, and every week I see something in there that I didn't see in the mainstream media. And I wouldn't be without my AFRO in any circumstances.
Can you imagine not being a journalist?
Well,
You look back at all the experiences you've had.
I think it sort of hit me when I first went to the government in public affairs, and you'd been accustomed to churning out stories, stories out the stores with deadlines here and there, and we had deadlines all the time when we were putting out all these editions. Sometimes you just topped off a story, updated a story, but papers coming out almost every day. I could write stories over there, and might see them 3 months later, that kind of thing. If you did a lot of personnel stories on people who were getting hired and that kind of stuff. But it was a drastic difference. It was sort of a shocker at the beginning. But everything has its benefits.
Was it fulfilling in any way?
Yeah, because
You seem to hesitate on that one, Mo.
well, I was lucky enough to be working for the Department of Health and Human Services, as it is now. When I first started, it was HEW, and at that time we had Social Security, and we had other agencies that they probably don't have no education and those kind of things. So you were in an area where the purpose was to help people, and it was their health problems, with civil rights problems. We had the civil rights office there and all that sort of stuff. So, it's fighting against smoking and encouraging better dieting and all that kind of stuff. And we had the Food and Drug Administration, and so you were in a branch of the government which was, in a way, doing sort of things that I had been interested in helping people with. And from that point of view, it was pretty, it was a career.
Okay. When you looking back at your other career, your career in journalism, how would you describe it?
I would say fulfilling to great degree. Um, I got an opportunity to record some important history. I got an opportunity to support some people who were trying to make things better. I got an opportunity to challenge some people whose views didn't reflect the diversity and the need for diversity that we have in this country. So all in all, I thought it was a pretty decent career.
More than pretty decent.
I enjoyed it.
More than pretty decent. You left your mark.
I enjoyed it.
How do you want to be remembered?
Huh?
How do you want to be remembered?
Well, I guess as someone who was willing to take the challenge when it was out there, someone who didn't shy away from challenges because they might be difficult or dangerous, and someone who did those things while keeping his family going and supporting his wife and children. And all in all, I think it went pretty good.
Is there anything we left out that you want to add?
I think you pretty much covered the territory. There was just a lot of little stories you got into that people never hardly hear about. I remember being down in Mississippi once, not too far from Money, and those places down there, covering a voter registration thing. And this professor from Howard University was the guy who was in charge of a voter registration project at the time. And we were in this small church down there. And outside, there were all these KKK people and citizen council people shooting people's pictures as they went and all that kind of stuff. And, Farmer was there, and people from some of the other key organizations were there. So what was going on, people would get up and talk about the kind of problem they had registering and vote. They would sing songs, it was sort of like some of the old church services where people would get up and testify. And every once in a while, the city would run its fire trucks up and down outside with the bells clanging and all that sort of stuff. And eventually, this middle-aged guy got up, and he was telling people how he had got turned away when he tried to register and vote. And he had been living on a plantation there for, I guess, most of his life. And he was telling people now that his guy he had worked for all these years was telling him that he had to get off the plantation. He got no job, got a wife, children, nowhere to go. And in the end, he tells the people, don't worry about me. You guys just keep going down there and try to register to vote. And those kind of things you ran into out there, and they just encourage you to do what you were doing on behalf of people who were actually carrying the burden.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you because there are a whole lot of generation of people who follow you and admire you and appreciate what you've done.
Well, I want to thank you because I've watched your career, and you're one of those guys who tell it like it is and don't mind doing it.
Yeah.
So I think we're in the same boat, man.
To be in the same boat with you, I take that any day.
Okay.
Thank you. I can't do it better than that.